We are adjourned.
The 2011 legislative session has adjourned, but the work is not done. We provide a summary in this week's Capitol Report. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Capitol Report. I'm Julie Bartkey. The 2011 legislative session began with an historic series of events, including a Republican-led Senate for the first time in nearly 40 years, a female majority leader, and a female president of the Senate. It began with optimism. The GOP-led legislature could reach an agreement with a DFL governor, Mark Dayton, on how to resolve a $5.1 billion budget deficit. But in the end, the two sides were polarized by their principles.
So we'll wait for the governor. We'll continue to push for our budget and to point out that this is the budget that can pass the legislature. The governor's budget, then the governor's supplemental budget, and then the governor's last proposal do not have support in the legislature. Senate DFLers, House DFLers wouldn't even carry these bills. And I think they're afraid of some of the same things we are. It would be the second highest tax rate in the country. There's only 6 governors in the whole country that are asking for more taxes right now. So we're going to rein in spending, try to grow private sector jobs, live within our means.
I think it's a shared failure on all our parts, the legislatures and mine, that we can't reach a resolution. I mean, that is what it is. But in my own evaluation, I have tried everything I could think of, including going from a $3.6 billion difference to $1.8 billion, going halfway last Monday and getting no response. So, I don't know what else I could have tried to do to avoid this outcome.
As the session was quickly coming to a close, we caught up with Senate Majority Leader Amy Koch. She talks about holding true to the caucus position of spending what is in the checkbook, and on her first session as Majority Leader. So first of all, what is your message, your caucus message to the voters of Minnesota?
Well, our message is that we on November 2nd on the campaign trail, we had promised people a few things. One was we were going to help with private sector job growth. We were going to live within our means, and we were going to reform government. And we've accomplished all 3 of those things. We've done some historic permitting and job legislation. We've produced a budget that does not raise taxes, that lives with the money in the checkbook. And within that budget, we've got a ton of reform and more work to do. So. We feel very strongly and proudly that we did what we came here to do, and more work to do next year.
And what are you proudest of?
Well, I think that there was some, overall I'm proudest of the budget. I think that you've got a majority that was in the minority for 38 years, and a lot of new people, and no one who had been committee chairs before. And so I think there was a lot of people looking at us kind of wondering, can we even accomplish this in 5 months? And I'm really proud of the hard work. It took a lot of long hours and a huge, a lot of learning, but I'm very, very proud of that.
As the new majority, would you say there were maybe some stumbles along the way too? Some things that you tried that didn't work, or do you think everything worked pretty well?
Well, one thing we learned is we can't over-communicate. We found that you think that a couple caucuses a week are enough, and then you find out that that you're just not communicating enough to members or the minority, and so the need to communicate over and over and say, and then never mind the media, right? So communication, key.
And you personally, we talked to you at the beginning of the session about your historic appointment election, and so wrapping things up, hindsight being 2020, how do you think you did in your new capacity?
Oh, well, I don't know. I'll let folks decide that. Better to talk to members and others. I won't speak for myself.
Okay. So obviously the DFL contends that the governor hasn't signed your budget, the work isn't done. What do you have to say to the DFL? Is there time to come together before a government shutdown to make this work? Is there enough give and take?
Oh, I mean, of course there's time, and we are having some constructive meetings with the governor. Disappointed in my Senate DFL colleagues. You got a lot of experience there, and they came with nothing, and no budget, no redistricting, largely no bills. So disappointed in that, because the governor said in his State of the State that we are in a fiscal crisis. We took him for his word and we went to work. but that'll be up for other folks to judge.
Do you plan to use it this time to talk to your constituents, and would it change your message at all between now and the end of June?
Oh no, I think the message remains the same. People are concerned about what they see as unsustainable growth in government spending, and whether it's Washington D.C., whether it's their local cities, or whether it's state government, people recognize that families have been living within their means, businesses are living within their means, and yet for some reason government has been immune to that, and it's not sustainable.
When session began, social issues were put on the back burner. Obviously, they did come forth about a month ago. So are you pleased with the pacing of when the social issues came in, or did you still think that maybe they were a little bit early?
Well, our focus was always the budget, and we really we did everything we could to make certain that was the priority. We pushed up those budget deadlines. We inverted them so the policy deadlines came later. There are other issues that came up, but overall, the focus, the focus was always on jobs, the budget, and pleased with that.
And overall, your impression of this session?
Really proud of my colleagues. As I said, I think that's the biggest thing I'll take away from this is a lot of new people coming off, literally, out of their homes, out of their businesses, stepped forward during incredibly difficult times, and they've done some amazing work.
Okay, Majority Leader Amy Koch, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Julie.
Senate Minority Leader Tom Bakk may be new to that position, but he is a veteran to the legislature. We asked him about the waning hours of session and his thoughts on what's to come. 12 hours and counting, even less by the time this airs. How are you feeling about the end of session and what looks to be an automatic special session?
Well, there's mechanically just no way that an agreement can be reached now and passed by the legislature and sent on to the governor. Mechanically, the bill drafters simply couldn't put the language together to ever make it happen. So clearly this session's going to end without a budget agreement. So tomorrow, Tuesday, is always a very emotional day, especially for those of us that are rural members, because we've came to St. Paul for 5 months now. And so the day after session, as you drive home, and I often characterize it as kind of putting the Capitol in my rear view mirror. And I have 4 hours to reflect on the session, on the 5 months as I'm finally going home. And oftentimes it's incredibly emotional. You think of all the things that you were working on personally, that you either didn't get done, or you got done, or is there something I could have done differently where I might have had a little better outcome on a piece of legislation I was working on. And it's always a time of reflection and frankly very emotional. I think it's different for metropolitan members because they go home every night. And but for us, when the session concludes, it's a big event because we're really going home. And I am going to drive home tomorrow incredibly disappointed. This session started with high hopes. I heard the Republican leadership say that they're going to focus like a laser on jobs and on balancing this budget, and that social issues were going to wait until next year. And somewhere over the course of this session, they got derailed. And back about a month ago, they took a fork in the road onto the social issue track. And we have been dealing with gay marriage, photo identification, guns, abortion, and the budget almost became secondary in the last month. So I'm not surprised that they were unable to come to a final budget agreement with the governor, because there was a point in the session about a month ago where I think they made a decision they weren't going to be able to resolve the budget, so they might as well go on and deal with the social issues for their conservative base. So I'm going to go home just very disappointed. I really had hopes that we could get some Minnesotans back to work and that we could fix this structural deficit problem that the state has. Neither of my priorities happened in this session.
What do you think the message of this session will be for Minnesotans?
Well, I think it's hard to tell until we get a little further down the road. Clearly there's going to be a special session. I think it depends on what the outcome of that is and kind of in what month do we finally resolve a budget. And back in 1981 when Republican Governor Koch was here and he had a Democratic legislature, it was October before they resolved the entire state budget. I hope it doesn't come to that this year. I hope that the Republicans, after they go home here, they take a week or two to reflect, they hear from their constituency, and they come back to the negotiating table with a willingness to compromise with the governor. I think as it relates to how will the public view this in a historical context, I think there are kind of two issues potentially that this session could be remembered for. One is the gay marriage amendment that they've decided now to put on the ballot. And we won't know the outcome of that until the election of November 2012. I think it will fail. And if that happens, I think this session will be historic in that previously 31 states have put a gay marriage amendment on the ballot, and every 31 states it has passed. I think Minnesota, the vote in Minnesota will show that the tide is turning in this country, one more towards tolerance, and that constitutions are protecting the rights of people with a minority opinion. And I think that could potentially be the historic legacy of this session, where the country started to make a turn, and it started in Minnesota. The other thing I think that potentially could be historic is how this special session and a potential government shutdown plays out. Because this is much different than 2005 was, when we had a very, very small state government shutdown. Most of the state budget in 2005 had been enacted into law. So the public really felt very little impact of the 2005 session. It's about a 9-day shutdown, if I remember right. This one will be different. I mean, if we end up with a shutdown this time, none of the state budget has been enacted into law. So Minnesotans will start to see that on the 1st of July. Minnesotans that are going to go on vacation for the 4th of July weekend will be the first probably to notice it when they head up Highway 35, headed north to Minnesota's Lake Country, and the wayside rests are closed. I think that will be kind of the first really reality check with the public that the legislature didn't get their work done. And then certainly the state parks won't be open. So I think those first few days in July are when the public will really start to grasp the inaction on the part of the legislature.
Senator, you've been a part of the negotiations in the governor's office, and when I asked the question of the GOP, what the tone was like inside those negotiations, Senator Lilly said that he was taking it from a very business-like stance and that it was very cordial, nothing has been broken. How would you describe the tone and the tenor of those negotiations, especially within the last day or two?
I think, I've spent quite a bit of time negotiating in my life. I worked on my first labor management contract as a negotiator. My business degree is actually in labor management relations. So I've been around labor management type negotiations since 1978. And I've seen some really good negotiators over the years. And in everything I've ever been involved in, eventually we came to an agreement. And both sides probably walked away from the table grumbling. Neither one was very happy with the outcome, but they were okay. And in every case, both sides were willing to compromise and accept some things that they didn't like. And that is really the way any negotiations needs to go, whether it's a business with your employees, if it's a business with your vendors, if it's you with your children. Both sides have to be willing to give something. Because if you don't, the whole winner-takes-all strategy of negotiating, which is where the Republicans are dug in right now, my way or the highway. What ends up happening when one side gets all is the other side goes away from the table angry. And then someday you have to return to the table to negotiate on other issues. And when one side then comes to the table in the subsequent negotiations with a grudge to settle, relationships are damaged badly, and it makes reaching agreements in the future much more difficult than they otherwise would have been.
And so do you think it's at that point right now? Are relationships damaged badly?
Well, I think the potential for that is there. I think right now we're going to head into what's likely a special session. I don't think the public is overly surprised by that. Special sessions have been so routine over the last decade that there's probably not a lot of surprise. But the weeks leading up to July 1st, I think, will determine what badly the relationship is strained long term. But clearly, if we head for a government shutdown, sides will be bitterly entrenched. And then I think finding an opportunity for compromise is going to be very, very difficult. And Minnesotans are going to lose. And I feel some obligation at some point, if the Republican majority is unwilling to apologize to the people of Minnesota, I guess I would want to apologize on their behalf. They have let the people down. I mean, when people elect you, they expect you to come here to be able to work with the other elected representatives of government, with the other branches, and reach an agreement and get your work done.
But does some of the onus fall on the governor as well then? Because as you say, it is compromise. He has offered up what he considers a compromise. The Republicans are not accepting that. So does the onus fall on him for not following through with maybe a bit more of a compromise?
Well, the governor has come a long way. When the governor was elected, the base level spending for the state, what he was looking at in the next biennium, was a $39 billion budget. That was the Tim Pawlenty budget, the base budget, $39 billion. When the governor submitted his proposal to the legislature on January 15th of 2011, the governor submitted a budget about $2 billion smaller than what was forecasted under current law. So the governor made a $2 billion move in a smaller budget in January. Then when the February forecast came out and there was a little more money around because the economy was a little stronger and there was a little more revenue, the governor made another significant move. And he cut his tax increase significantly. He took the surcharge off of high-income wage earners off the table and said, because of the new revenue, we will not need to have this additional surcharge on the very wealthy Minnesotans. So there he made a second move. And then just back on Monday, he made a historic move in the negotiations. He actually cut his proposed tax increase that he had submitted to the legislature in half and said, I not only am willing to live with half the revenue I proposed, but I'm going to make an additional $1 billion in cuts in my budget. And the Republican leadership is still exactly where they were back when this session started. They're at $34 billion, not one penny more. I think the governor has come a long way in multiple moves, and the Republicans still have not countered, not moved 1 inch from where they started this session.
Okay, Minority Leader Bakk, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Social issues dominated the last week of session. One that brought hundreds, if not thousands, to the Capitol was a bill defining marriage as a union between one man and one woman. State law already prohibits gay marriage, but supporters of the amendment say it's necessary to prevent judges or future lawmakers from making gay marriage legal in Minnesota. Critics say it's divisive, and such an amendment would put discrimination into the Constitution. While in the hallways, supporters and opposers stood near one another, but their opinions on the issue were vast.
Same-sex marriage doesn't hurt anybody, and this is not going to help any Minnesota family. It's just going to hurt Minnesotans. This is not the Minnesota I moved to, and I think this bill is disgusting.
Well, I hope it passes because the Bible says that marriage is between one man and one woman.
The Senate author of that bill, Warren Limmer, was also the author of the voter ID bill. We caught up with him to ask why he chose to move forward with two controversial bills this session. How did it feel to first attach your name to two very controversial pieces, and second, to have them go through?
Seems like my name is always on something controversial these days, so matter of fact, I think now that Osama bin Laden's taken off the top of the list, they just moved Warren Limmer up. But it does seem in some respects historic. The first bill, the voter photo ID bill, is certainly a landmark piece of legislation. I'm very excited about that. 80% of the public polled says they want photo identification. They present identification for everything else in life these days. We need to get on a plane, you need to have a driver's license. You need to have a photo identification for cashing a check, opening a bank account. Even in Maple Grove, where I come from, getting rid of your leaf waste and yard waste, you have to present a photo ID to show if you are the taxpayer paying for that service. But for some reason, that policy has eluded Minnesota when it comes to one of our most precious rights, and that's the right to vote, and make sure that that individual voting is actually the person who they say they are.
Any indication of whether or not the governor will sign that bill at this time?
You know, we're still waiting. The bill has been passed for a few days. It's sitting down on his desk. I'm hoping he's thinking about it, reading it carefully, because it's really not that obnoxious of a bill. The public's behind it, and I really would hope that the governor could. We even added his 4 quarterly campaign reports requirement to kind of sweeten it up for him and bring more transparency to Minnesota campaigns.
Okay, let's move on to your constitutional amendment for defining marriage as a union between one man and one woman. Again, very controversial, brought thousands of protesters and supporters here to the Capitol.
That's right. Well, as you know, it's a controversial bill, but no more controversial than the 31 other states that had passed the bill in the last 10 years. And this is really a product of activist courts that are throughout the country trying to define legislation, define marriage as something other than one man, one woman. That's not the court's job. They are not the representational branch of government. They're only supposed to interpret law, not make law. And so with a number of court cases now sitting in the appellate court of Minnesota right now on this very issue, it's very timely to bring a definition of marriage to the people rather than let a few judges or even this body, the legislature, define it in any other way.
So what do you consider your role now that it's passed the legislature? Will you be actively promoting that, the ban against gay marriage come time for next year's vote? You
know, I don't call it a ban on gay marriage because it's really a referendum question to define it. We purposely did not go after or try to restrict same-sex civil union or domestic partnerships in any way. That's for some future legislature to decide. But what my role is, I'm not quite sure. I'm kind of exhausted after 7 years finally getting it to a final vote. I'm sure if someone wants me to come out and talk about it, I would do that. But really, I think my job is kind of 99% done. And now it's up to the public, and it's up to those that want to promote this issue one way or the other. It's really up to them to sell the concept to the public.
Are you pleased with the way this legislative session went, primarily with your pieces of legislation?
Well, you know, we certainly had a loud demonstration the last few weeks. That was, in my opinion, due to the fact that the House kind of lingered a little bit. They were trying to take care of other priorities that we're also elected to take care of. And so in that lingering, the forces began to congregate and mobilize, got rather loud and boisterous in the chamber. But, you know, I looked down on the chamber from the 3rd floor on one of those really boisterous nights. They had people wanting tax cuts over here. You had the gay protesters over there. We had the pro-marriage people in one corner. And then we had a bunch of other sundry issues that are always here. I looked down, I talked to Senator Newman, I said, isn't democracy grand? We can do this. We aren't killing each other. We aren't fighting each other. And it all seems to work no matter what we do.
Senator Limmer, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
You bet.
The governor's veto of the majority of budget bills was expected, but a month earlier he did sign into law the first of those finance bills. The author of the agriculture bill, Senator Doug Magnus, explains why he moved that bill out of committee so quickly and his thoughts on the negotiations.
Well, I was, very concerned coming into the session about the lines drawn in the sand early on when the governor is saying, hey, I was elected to raise taxes, and the majority of the legislature saying they were elected to not raise taxes, and that was a big concern of mine, and I did not want to get caught up in this end game, and I've been through this before, and I did not want to get caught in that. So it was important in that sense. In the other sense, we were the first bill that we decided, our leadership team decided to send out, and I felt it was important that when you're the first horse out of the gate, you run the right way and hope the others will follow you. And so I was very careful about how we did our bill. went through all the processes, worked with the minority, worked with the governor's staff, worked with the commissioners in the agency very closely, and really showed how a bill, I believe, should be done. And so we were fortunate then the governor signed it and got that one behind us.
Your bill was considered non-controversial, and during the bill signing, it was promoted as a show of bipartisan support, bipartisan effort. And the hope was that that feeling would carry forth into the other finance bills. That hasn't happened. Are you surprised by that at all?
Well, again, the governor said early on he was not going to accept any policy provisions in the finance bills, and but we did put some policy provisions in there, and they were contentious, and we did fight, have our fights with the agencies and the governor about it, and. But you know, we fought hard. Both sides did, and in the end, come away with a compromise. And I think it was important to show that we could compromise. Both sides could, and so that was beneficial. But you know, I think the way we did it, I've served half of my term in my career in the legislature in the minority and half in the majority now, so I know how both sides feel. And I think, at least in the Senate, I would say that. Yes, the Republicans are probably struggling a little bit, being in the minority for the first time in many, many years. But I will say also on the other side that the DFL is struggling mightily trying to figure out how to operate in the minority. They're struggling with, realizing that, hey, we don't run the show here. We're not going to have the total say on all the bills and everything else. So they're struggling in their part too.
In your opinion, do Minnesotans win or lose if it comes down to a special session?
Well, you know, we've had the special sessions aren't so special anymore. We've had them, I think, in the 9 years now I've been here. We've had 8 special sessions in the 8 of those years. So they're really not special anymore. I was hopeful that people would come to their senses and we could get at least a framework of an agreement and spend a few more days here and finish that off. I'm still, could happen, but minute by minute it looks less likely of that happening. So with that said, I guess it's a disappointment that we're going to have to go through this and really going to have cooler heads come in and to prevail and figure out an ending solution.
Senator Doug Magnus, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Much of the focus of the last hours of this legislative session was on budget negotiations and the activity in committee rooms and on the House and Senate floors. However, those final hours and days were a last opportunity for voices to be heard. Whether in the hallway, the rotunda, or in front of the media, the voices were loud, their messages clear. We'd like to leave you with some of the sights and sounds from the final days of the 2011 legislative session.
My brothers and sisters that look just like me are suffering in schools and not getting the proper education.
We want our troops back, we want our country back, and at state level here, we got to cut from the top.